This is the story of Prince Boji, who is born to giant parents but is still the smallest person to ever walk the Kingdom of Bosse. He is weak, deaf, and naive, but still has the biggest courage to walk with his head high. His day goes about running around the field and playing with the animals that roam his father's land. Because of his handicaps, Boji doesn't play with other children his age and younger, because there may be misunderstandings between the two parties, and Boji is usually a victim to the people's ridicule. One day, bored Boji sneaks out of the castle to explore the surroundings of the kingdom. Cage, a criminal shadow, sees the helpless Boji and runs to scold him, but realizes that Boji is able to hear him. However, they both get surprised when they realize that they can communicate. Boji gives his clothes to Cage and returns to the palace in his underwear, earning the mockery and humiliation of the townspeople, who despise Boji for being the opposite of what a prince is supposed to be. As the days go by, Cage is surprised to see that Boji keeps cheerfully returning to deliver garments to him, but is even more impressed when Boji explains that he is the heir to the throne, so he decides to follow him closely to find out a little more about his life. Passing through the village, Cage feels sorry for Boji, as all the villagers make fun of him for returning to the palace without clothes. He also witnesses Boji's mistreatment by the king's second wife, as she tries to make sure that her son, who is second in the chain of succession, is the king's choice to inherit the throne. However, Cage discovers that Boji is crying inconsolably in his room, making it clear that the little prince is only pretending that mistreatment does not affect him. Boji runs to meet his father, but as Cage was starting to follow him, he is intercepted by a guard. Boji arrives at the meeting with his father, and a flashback shows the great feats the king had accomplished before he became the highest authority. But now he is ill, and prepares to leave his heir to power. However, the king is saddened by Boji's condition, as he is his beloved son, and wants to make him his heir in honor of his first wife, who passed away, but he knows he is not strong enough. Meanwhile, Cage is interrogated by the guard, as he has realized that Cage is a member of the extinct Shadow clan, but Cage manages to escape the interrogation. Boji trains with Domus, his master, but Daida arrives on the scene and challenges him to a duel, giving Domus a great match and leaving him with his mouth open. Seeing this, Boji challenges him to a duel and the whole kingdom is paralyzed, as no one can believe that Boji has done something like this, due to the fact that Daida has a great reputation as a swordsman. When the duel begins, Boji leaves everyone open-mouthed by demonstrating that he has impressive dodging agility. However, when he finally decides to attack instead of just dodge, he barely manages to ruffle Daida's hair. The story stops for a moment and is placed in the past to narrate the life of Cage, who belonged to a clan of shadows that carried out the dirtiest tasks of the kingdom they served. One day they began to be persecuted and tortured, but Cage's mother sacrificed herself so that her son could escape to another kingdom. Although Cage was about to be caught, a couple of friends of the royal family managed to save him. Upon arriving in the new kingdom, everything went uphill for him, as he doesn't have a shred of money and realizes that no one would give him food for free, so he trades his greatest treasure, the toy his mother gave him. However, the store owner accuses him of being a thief, and he gets beaten up. An opportunist appears and gives him leftover food to take him as a slave and exploit him. Moreover, he realizes Cage's abilities and forces him to steal, filling himself with riches thanks to the little criminal shadow's skills. In fact, the little Cage tries to feel loved by this scoundrel and tries to take him as a father figure to feel loved. However, the scoundrel loses a lot of money in gambling and vice, so he sells Cage to the police. Fortunately, Cage manages to escape from the police but witnesses the death of the supposed father figure who briefly nurtured him, so Cage becomes more and more hardened, becoming cold and apathetic. Back in the present, Cage sees Boji fighting fervently and wonders why he cares so much about that child. Boji dodges and makes a fool of Daida, his brother, but Domus tells him that he must fight like a real prince, so he decides to stop dodging, and Daida beats him up. Seeing that no one stops the fight, Cage decides to go do it himself, but a guard named Apaius intervenes furiously and looks at Domus helplessly, so the fight comes to an end and Daida retires. In the evening, Boji cries inconsolably and tries to take a life-size sword to see if it can support his weight, but Cage interrupts him and tells him that he shouldn't do the things that others expect of him, congratulating him on his unique fighting style and telling him that he will accompany him everywhere from now on. Days later, Boji's father passes away, leaving the royal family heartbroken. However, his telegram is exposed, and Boji is announced as the heir to the throne, which angers Daida. A spirit comes out of the mouth of the king's body, and upon seeing Boji, bursts out laughing, leaving everyone open-mouthed. However, on the day of the royal presentation, the palace spokesman announces that Daida was chosen by King Bosse to inherit the throne. A flashback reveals that the queen held a secret meeting together with members of the nobility to cancel King Bosse's will and announce Daida as the heir to the throne. Meanwhile, Cage is pursued by Babin, Daida's master and right-hand man. Cage confesses that he is not in the kingdom to wreak havoc, but to help Boji. However, Bebin appears in front of Boji minutes later and tells him that Cage left the kingdom, which saddens Boji. Meanwhile, Daida tells Bebin to take care of those who voted against him at the secret meeting, so Bebin fears that the magic mirror is corrupting Daida. Boji searches for Cage everywhere until he enters a cave and encounters a giant snake. The snake explains to Boji that Cage was captured by Bebin, but feeling indebted to Boji, he tells him that Cage is safe. On the other hand, Bebin rebukes Apayas to carry out King Daida's order, but Apayas defeats Bebin and leaves. Meanwhile, Daida tells his mother that he wishes to send Boji elsewhere, as he is a nuisance. However, Boji only wishes to leave the palace, but when he explains this to Queen Hyling, she refuses, as she is very worried about what might happen to him. Anyway, Boji tries to escape through the window but falls and is seriously injured. Hyling desperately runs to him and begins to heal him using magic, so Boji realizes that she was the one who healed him before. At night, Hyling remembers when she married the king and tried to get close to Boji, who was a shy and vulnerable child constantly suffering from the loss of his mother. Hyling managed to win Boji's affection, but she cast him aside when Daida was born. Remembering this, the queen allowed Boji to leave the kingdom to live out his adventure, but on the condition that he would be under the care of Domus and Hokuro. Before leaving, Boji bids farewell to Hyling with an emotional greeting. Daida once again receives dark instructions from the magic mirror, who tells her that she must finish what she started with Prince Boji, as his life is a threat to the kingdom. However, while Daida plots horribly against her brother, Boji lives his adventurous life innocently without harming or upsetting anyone. Arriving in town, Domus heads to the store to buy groceries and leaves Hokuro in Boji's care, but the prince suddenly sneaks off to see a puppet play and lays down for a nap. When Hokuro finds him, he realizes that Boji's bag had been stolen, so Domus scolds him. However, Boji finds his bag on the road the next day, and they notice that no items were stolen. During dinner, an attempt on Boji's life puts his bodyguards on alert. The next day, they arrive in a strange and obscure town of ill repute. Domus tells Haruko to find an inn for the night and takes Boji to the main tourist attraction there, a volcano called the Gate of Hell. Domus explains to the little prince that if he comes closer, he can see the bottom of the volcano. Boji approaches with great enthusiasm, but Domus betrays him by pushing him into the abyss. Consumed with remorse, Domus laughs bitterly and throws himself on the ground to cry. Boji regains consciousness and, seeing a rope tied to a kunai, remembers that this object came out of his backpack and saved his life. As he goes over to check his backpack, he discovers that Cage was in there waiting for the right moment to save him, which moves the prince to tears. Cage explains that he was with him every step of the way, from the moment he fell from the top of the palace to the moment Domus betrayed him. Then they set off on a new adventure. Meanwhile, Domus remembers when King Daida ordered him to take care of Boji, and tries to convince himself that he has done nothing wrong. Cage presents Boji with a cloth crown, but the wind blows it away and it falls on a skull, putting the friends on alert. They soon discover more human remains and see a thick green mist approaching them and begin to run. But the mist causes them to faint, and a strange figure approaches them. Meanwhile, King Daida is guided by the magic mirror to the innermost part of the palace, where the remains of King Bosse are located. Upon arrival, he is met by two guards, who will help him with the ritual. The entire hall is filled with beasts and creatures preserved in ice, as well as the body of King Bosse, which is placed on a delicate and technologically advanced pedestal. The guardians begin to turn a crank and King Bosse's body is processed in a kind of blender, which terrifies King Daida. The liquid secreted by King Bosse is placed in an iron sphere. The guardians then take the sphere to a strange room full of windows and hang it on a chain, causing the sunlight to hit the sphere directly, and it becomes incandescent like the sun. After this, they destroy the sphere and obtain an egg, which immediately hatches and gives birth to a gigantic phoenix. One of the guards locks the phoenix in a vault that leaves the phoenix's head uncovered, which is cut off by the other guard as they set fire to the phoenix's body inside the vault. Finally, the potion is completed when the blood of the phoenix is mixed with the resurrection gema they obtained by burning its body. King Daida cannot believe everything he has seen and refuses to take the potion, so the magic mirror tries to convince him again and again. However, King Daida refuses and the guardians have no choice but to force him, but Daida defeats them without any problems. Boji and Cage are taken to a strange palace, where an eccentric king welcomes them. Meanwhile, Hokuro realizes what Domus has done and unsheathes his sword to avenge Boji, but he is no match for Domus, who doesn't want to hurt Hokuro and just knocks him out. He then cuts off the hand with which he betrayed Boji. The king asks Boji if the rumors he has heard about him being a weakling who lost the throne to his younger brother are true, which angers Cage, who explains that they are looking for the king of the underworld, as they have heard that he is able to make Boji strong. The eccentric king confesses that he is Daisha, king of the underworld and second in the rankings of kings. To determine if Boji has enough potential to be trained, he must fight the commander of the Order of the Underworld, which worries Cage, as that cavalry is the strongest and most feared in the entire world. Boji begins to attack, and takes away the illusion of all those who expected to see the heir of the mighty King Bosse, as it is literally seen that he is a weakling. King Daisha wants to chase them away, but Cage convinces them that Boji is better at dodging than anyone else. So the knight begins to attack relentlessly, and is shocked to see that it is actually impossible to hit Boji. However, Daisha refuses to train him, since despite being good at dodging, Boji lacks strength. Cage hands him the letter of recommendation he found in Boji's bag, but Daisha is furious when he reads it and asks his guards to throw Boji and Cage out of the place. Once outside, the commander of the order explains to them that the letter was not addressed to Daisha, but to Despa, the king's brother, for whom the king is envious. He also confesses that he has given them this information because he wants to see Prince Boji become stronger, so the friends leave, happily greeting the commander. Meanwhile, King Daida argues with the magic mirror, who tells him that he will not be able to escape the fate she has prepared for him. At that moment, Appius bursts in and runs violently towards Daida, but the mirror interrupts him just in time, and Appius is surprised to hear that voice. A flashback shows Appius walking alongside King Bosse to meet a strange mage named Lady Miranjo, who promised to make Appius stronger. Back in the present day, she tells Appius to humble himself in front of Daida to ask for forgiveness, but Daida hesitates and tries to kill him, and only backs down when Miranjo convinces him. However, Appius knocks Daida out surprisingly. Later, Miranjo reveals to Appius that the fight against Bebin was part of his plan, as Bebin would do anything for Daida. Also, the guards make Daida drink the elixir, and Miranjo reveals that this elixir is not truly what she had said. After this, the ritual is completed, and Miranjo performs the incantation for Daida to become a vessel. On the other hand, Boji and Cage arrive at Despa's house and give him the destroyed letter, explaining what has happened. Despa explains to them that Daisha is envious of his appearance, as he has always been very self-conscious. Despa then tells them that he has made a very weak man king once, but that he accomplished the feat because he followed his advice. So Cage decides to give him all of his money so that Boji can receive training. Upon entering the mansion, Despa takes the duo into a living room of sorts, where he does a spiritual reading of Boji and gives him a pessimistic diagnosis. The prince lacks physical strength and will never be like King Bosse. Boji and Cage are saddened by this and leave the place, but Despa intervenes and tells Boji that he will not be like Bosse, but that he can exploit his qualities to be even better, moving the young prince and his best friend to tears. The next day, Boji wakes up before Cage and starts cleaning the entire mansion to make his friend's burden lighter. He also does his best to prepare breakfast. However, Cage and Despa wake up to the horrifying smell of Boji's food, who kindly invites them to eat. Upon tasting a bite of breakfast, they both begin to hallucinate, as if they have consumed some kind of substance. Then, Despa tells Cage that he noticed that mysteriously, Boji is the son of giants, but does not possess any kind of exceptional strength or characteristics. Finally, Despa takes Boji to a huge room full of swords to begin his training. Despa has already chosen the best combat weapon for Boji, but tells the young prince that he must discover it on his own. And after wandering around the place for a moment, he finds the perfect weapon. The training begins, and day after day Boji gives his best in intensive sessions from which he emerges exhausted. One day, Cage hears an incredible roar and goes over to see what is going on, discovering that Boji broke a gigantic rock. On the other hand, King Bosse returns to his throne in the identity of Daida. A flashback shows that Bosse accompanied Miranjo to make a pact with the demon we saw chapters before. The demon replies that he can take the strength of Bosse's children to give it to him, a condition Bosse accepts without hesitation. He then goes to find a powerful giant warrior woman to ask her to form a family with him, and after fighting to win her heart, the woman accepts. Sometime later, Bosse meets his tiny son, who wins the love of his parents. Bosse decides to find the kingdom and see to the safety and well-being of his weak young son. Back in the present, Miranjo tells Bosse that they must kill Hyling to fulfill the promise, which leaves the king pensive. Meanwhile, Hyling receives news of what has happened to Boji. A flashback reveals that Domus explained every detail to Hokuro, but that Hokuro only planned to finish him off anyway, so their paths diverged. Days later, Hokuro's execution is carried out by Queen Hyling, who is furious about what happened to Boji. However, Domus bursts in and fights with dozens of guards to save Hokuro, but just as they are about to escape, King Bosse bursts in and leaves everyone's mouth agape. Just by looking at him, Domus suspects that this is not Daida, as he has the aura of King Bosse. Moreover, the two begin to fight and Domus doesn't stand a chance. Hyling notices that the person who tried to save Hokuro was Domus, so he orders his execution immediately, but Bosse leaves everyone open-mouthed by announcing that Boji is not dead. A flashback reveals that he received this information from Miranjo. He also explains to everyone present that Boji is training to become stronger. Domus and Hokuro are expelled from the kingdom by King Bosse, but at least they are not executed. Before he is thrown out, Bosse explains to Domus that he has taken the body of King Daida. As they leave the scene, Hokuro asks Domus to train him to become stronger, whereupon Domus reveals that Bosse asked him to go down into the innermost recesses of the palace to destroy the portal to the underworld. Meanwhile, King Bosse reveals his true identity to Squire Dorsha and his wife Hyling, while Miranjo and Apeus wonder what the king is planning. After this, the queen faints, and Dorsha must watch over her safety until she recovers, as he sees the imminent danger lurking. A flashback shows how Dorsha ended up being the queen's bodyguard, as he used to be the king's squire and one of the army's generals, but was relegated to that task. However, the queen treated Dorsh with much affection and asked him to take his job in a relaxed manner, as his only concern at that time was to establish a better bond with Boji. They both learned sign language to communicate better with the prince and managed to gain his trust little by little. Back in the present, Dorsha faces the fearsome beast trying to enter the queen's room, but seeing that he will not be able to only withstand their attacks without counterattacking, he decides to shed his heavy armor to defeat them. A flashback shows that Bosse revealed to him that these beasts would appear in the night, but Dorsha did not know whether he should defend the queen or not, as the king seemed to have allowed such an attack. Nevertheless, Dorsha finishes off the beasts and is seriously wounded. The next day, he wakes up in the queen's room and discovers that she herself has been taking care of him along with her maid. Hyling reveals that she wishes to fight Bosse, and although Dorsha tries to convince her to understand the situation before making a move, Hyling rushes to the throne and confronts Bosse, telling him to return Daida safely to her. However, Bosse does not even respond. In another dimension, Daida hears her mother's voice and begins to call out to her. Hyling hears Daida's voice and runs all over the place trying to identify where it is coming from, until she realizes that Daida's consciousness is trapped inside her body and that Bosse has taken her over. So she decides to take a knife and get Daida out of there. However, Dorsha grabs her and tells her that if she kills Daida's body, her soul will disappear. He then knocks her out, and Bosse tells her that they will send another attack to finish her off, and that it will be more efficient than the previous one. So she asks him to take her to another country and keep her safe until things are settled. Days later, Cage, Despa, and Boji go out to dinner to celebrate the completion of Boji's training, but a group of bullies taunting Despa appear on the scene and start a fight with him. Boji butts in and eats a vicious punch, which worries Cage. However, this punch doesn't hurt Boji one bit, who even takes a tiny punch to the face of one of the bullies and leaves him dizzy. Then, as Boji takes care of the other two bullies, Despa explains to Cage that Boji is able to use his incredible agility to hit weak spots using his opponent's own strength. In addition, Boji wields his sword to knock one of the bullies unconscious, as the bully had taken his axe and was threatening to hurt everyone. Despa explains to Cage that Boji is able to use his thin sword like a needle to cut off the bloodstream of his opponents without even hurting them. This makes Boji invincible, as he can defeat his enemies leaving them unharmed, as well as assassinate them without leaving wounds. As they leave the bar, Despa tells his wards to go ahead, while he returns to meet the bullies, revealing that it was all an act to test Boji's skills. Despite that great display, Despa reveals that this is just a taste of Boji's strength. Filled with remorse and trapped, Daida sees a little girl and goes over to talk to her. A group of ghosts appears insulting the girl, and Daida defends her. But seeing that she has no hands or face but wears a mask, she realizes that those people were the ones who did that to her. She thanks him and stays with Daida, who promised to help her get out of that place. On the other hand, King Desha discovers that Ukin, an extremely powerful prisoner, escaped from his cell along with 5 other criminals and may endanger the Bosse kingdom, so he gathers his whole army to capture them and plan a strategy to seize the moment and make a coup d'etat in the Bosse kingdom. In fact, while Boji and Cage were saying goodbye to Despa, the soldiers of the Order ask Boji for help to capture the prisoners. Then a flashback reveals that the person who orchestrated everything was Miranjo, who freed the criminals and facilitated their access to the kingdom. In fact, he led them to Bosse's throne for them to capture him. Kingbo, one of the criminals, wishes to take the throne, but Ukin defeats him easily and violently, so another of the criminals throws him outside the castle. Meanwhile, Hyling and Dorsha bring a small army to the castle to fight the criminals, and there they learn that Miranjo, who now lives inside the mirror, was to blame for everything. Dorsha rebukes Miranjo, and Miranjo reveals that she wants to destroy the kingdom, so the small army prepares for the worst, and after fighting against some beasts, the other criminals join the fight and put Hyling's army in trouble to the point that the queen almost faints from using her healing powers. In addition, Ukin sows chaos everywhere in the kingdom, and King Desha's soldiers arrive in time to fight him. Seeing that Dorsha is being brutally wounded, Hyling screams for help. King Bosse hears this and breaks his chains and his cell without trouble, but he remembers Miranjo and decides not to go out to the fight. When Dorsha was about to be finished, Bebin's giant snake appears and saves him, so Hyling concentrates on saving Dorsha with his powers. Gigan, one of the criminals, starts beating the snake rampantly and leaves it on the verge of death, but Boji arrives just in time and knocks it unconscious in just one move, so Cage gives elixirs to Hyling so she can heal the snake. Then, Gigan and the beast swear allegiance to Boji and join him. Domus and Hokuro prepare to destroy the gate to the underworld, but it suddenly opens and King Desha's huge army begins to parade towards the palace, so Domus begins to confront them and demonstrates his enormous virtuosity fighting alone against the whole army, until Desha appears and defeats Domus effortlessly. Boji and Cage arrive just in time, but when Boji sees Domus, he begins to feel dark feelings he has never felt before, so Cage helps him to stabilize emotionally. Desha reveals that he is in the kingdom to kill Miranjo, who freed the prisoners of the underworld. Upon hearing that name, Boji remembers that that woman brutally ended his mother's life, while she sacrificed herself to save him. Desha telepathically communicates with Despa to ask him for information about Boji, and he tells him that he is no match for Boji or Bosse, so it is better for him to withdraw from the underworld and let Boji be the one to defeat Bosse, as Desha wants to defeat Bosse to meet the demon with whom Bosse made a pact. Because of this, Desha withdraws from the kingdom, as his goals have changed. Domus and Hokuro seize the moment and humble themselves before Boji asks for forgiveness, but he runs away, as he only feels that he doesn't want to be near them anymore. Cage runs after him, while Domus and Hokuro pledge to do their best to be forgiven by Boji. A flashback reveals the story of the god Satan, the king of the underworld. He had discovered the key to immortality and reigned as a tyrant. He married a human and had 3 children, Desha, Despa, and Ukin, who were in charge of overthrowing him and putting an end to his cruel reign. Ukin awakened the power of being immortal at the age of 25, and although he did his best not to go mad because of this, he lost his sanity, and his brothers had no choice but to lock him in a prison in the underworld, a place from which Miranjo took him out to carry out his plan. Finally, Domus and Hokuro managed to set fire to the underworld gate and leave to join Boji. However, Boji is already fighting Ukin, whom Despa considers the only opponent Boji cannot defeat due to his immortality. Cage observes all this and tells Boji to run away, as no matter how hard he tries, he won't be able to knock him out. Bebin asks Bosse why he allows Miranjo to wreak havoc in the kingdom, so Bosse goes back in time and explains how he met Miranjo, unaware that Daida was also witness to these memories. During his youth, Bosse visited a village of powerful magicians who dared to defy the gods. Seeing the strength they had, Bosse fought with one of the strongest mages in the place, Miranjo's father. It was a fight to the death in which Bosse was seriously wounded, but Miranjo's mother was so kind that she healed him so that he would not perish, so Bosse felt the need to take care of Miranjo. Sometime later, the people of the kingdom were expelled from their land by the gods, so they joined forces with a nearby kingdom that had a horrible reputation, as they were dishonest and swindlers. They took advantage again and again of the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Wizards, who had even made the place incredibly prosperous. After taking as much profit as they could, the brazen villagers break into Miranjo's house and murder her mother to rob her, as well as taking Miranjo as a prisoner. Meanwhile, Boji fights rampantly against Ukin, but since Ukin is immortal, Boji begins to feel fatigued. Despa and one of Dacia's soldiers arrive on the scene and join the fight, but they are no match for Ukin. Despa is badly wounded and falls unconscious, which provokes Boji's fury. However, Ukin fights back and knocks Boji out, so Cage makes a desperate attempt to save his friend and devours Ukin. Unfortunately, Ukin manages to escape from Cage's body and ends her life in the process. Back in Miranjo's story, Bosse found her in terrible condition and exploded in rage, taking revenge on all the villagers. He then took her to a doctor to rebuild her body and swore he would never let anything bad happen to her again. Bebin listens attentively to all this, but tells him that he will leave to help King Boji with his mission. Ukin knocks everyone out, but Miranjo momentarily intervenes to transport them to the dimension between life and death, where Cage begins to pass into the other world. However, he hears Boji's screams and decides to cling to life, with the help of Miranjo, who identified with Cage even though they are on different sides. Domas, Apeas, Bebin, and Dorsha arrive just in time to fight Ukin, but despite giving their best effort and keeping him under control for a few minutes, he brings them to their knees. In the dimension of the living and the dead, Miranjo is reunited with her mother and Shiina, Bosse's first wife. They both tried to convince her to stop making such a mess because of her selfish desire to live together with Bosse, revealing that she was mortally wounded the day she killed Shiina, so she made a pact with the demon to have her spirit locked in the magic mirror. Also, Daida, Despa, and Boji see all this and feel compassion for Miranjo as they understand her tragic story. In the world of the living, Bosse arrives on the battlefield and uses the powers Daida inherited from Hyling to heal all the wounded. He then begins to fight Ukin, and after tearing him apart multiple times, decides to imprison him in a giant rock to prevent his body from regenerating further. After this, both he and Boji know that the time has come to face each other. But first, Bosse approaches Miranjo to talk to her, and Miranjo takes the moment to apologize for everything she has done since she literally used Boji and Daida to be able to have Bosse by her side even when he died. Bosse also apologizes to her, as he was never able to set boundaries for her. Finally, he says goodbye to her and goes to fight Boji. The expected fight between father and son breaks out, and Boji feels that he fights against Bosse's gigantic body, as despite being in Daida's small body, he has a mammoth strength. Bosse puts up a great fight, but his son Boji manages to defeat him and leaves everyone shocked. The king moves in to destroy the mirror so that Miranjo will finally be free, but it is Boji who decides to give him the final rest. The spirits of Bosse and Miranjo leave their bodies, but although Bosse seems to go to heaven, Miranjo is trapped by the demon with whom he had made a pact to leave Bosse's soul alone, so he departs to a terrifying dimension. From the afterlife, Bosse shows his memories to Daida. A flashback reveals that Bosse confessed to Miranjo that his dream was to become the most powerful being on Earth, and that she sought out different enemies so that he can measure his strength. But since none were worthy opponents, she led him to meet Chabi Shin, a god who literally beat Bosse up. Because of this, Miranjo led him to make a pact with the demon we saw earlier, so Daida finally understands why Boji was born without strength. After defeating Chabi Shin, Bosse felt empty and dedicated his life to protecting Miranjo and his family, so he takes advantage of Daida regaining his body and consciousness to ask him to save Miranjo. Despa and his men manage to cut off the demon's head and bribe him to get a wish, and although Despa was going to use it to take away Ukin's immortality, Boji asks that he leave the wish to Daida. The young king wishes Miranjo back to life, so he finds her inside the demon, asks her to marry him, and leaves everyone present open-mouthed. He then apologizes for everything that has happened, while thanking Despa for being a great tutor to Boji. Despa telepathically communicates with Dacia to apologize for leaving the wish to Daida, and Daida forgives him but asks for a large amount of gold and silver, as well as becoming the first king in the ranking. Hyling arrives on the scene and gives his children a big hug, and almost has a heart attack when he learns that Daida is going to marry the woman who caused the whole mess. Daida decides to renounce the throne in front of everyone and admits that Boji is the right person to reign. Days later, Boji is crowned and begins to exercise his kingship, parading in front of his kingdom and exercising royal duties. However, he begins to feel that this is not what he had planned, So he decides to renounce the throne and return the kingdom to Daida, leaving for a new adventure with Cage to find a kingdom from scratch, just as Bosse had done. Now we are going through Season 2, where Cage and Boji are setting the table up when they hear a scream coming from Despa's room. They learn that Despa has developed an age spot on his face, preventing him from continuing to train Boji. Cage tries to persuade Despa to reconsider his offer to buy him some fruits and vegetables, but Despa retreats violently under his bed's blanket. Despa realizes after hearing this that a shutter cap would help him out of his predicament. Despa assigns Cage the task of finding one and provides him with a gold coin to purchase one. Cage's search for a shutter cap sends him on a wild goose chase for one before he realizes that the Okana forest might have some. However, he is also warned about the area's ominous monster. Cage nevertheless enters the forest and saves an elderly woman from a monster. Cage carried the elderly woman back to her residence because she had broken her ankle. Cage does a number of chores in her garden and house there. Cage receives a pie as recompense for his troubles. Cage offers the pie he got from the old lady as an apology for not being able to get a shuttercap mushroom upon returning to Despa's house. Despa then reveals that the ominous monster who extracted shuttercaps from the backs of the forest creatures was the elderly lady. After that, the elderly woman would make those who wanted the shuttercap mushrooms do low-level labor. Despa lets Cage keep the gold coin he gave him because he was able to get a pie-shaped shuttercap. The pie is then enjoyed by all. Despa assigns Boji to make money for him because he is greedy and wants more money, but he says it will help him learn more about society. The two then travel to the town to find him a job. They first try to work as florists, but Boji is unable to do the job the owner wants, so he is told to try something else. Boji and Cage collect firewood with the Order of the Underworld in the desert. Cage surprises Boji by impersonating a cactus. After that, they bring the firewood they found back to the camp, and find out from the captain that the two soldiers they saw were looking for wild animals in the area. Boji agreed that Cage was confident that he could stand his ground against a wild animal. Cage woke up Boji when he saw the shadow of what he thought was a large wild animal, but when they look into it, the wild animal has vanished, and in the distance, they see three people who don't look like they belong to the Order of the Underworld. They follow, but they also lose track of them all, and the wind blows out their torch, leaving them without light. The following morning, the captain of the Knights of the Underworld tells the boys that he followed them when they left the camp and was worried about how they were doing. Cage, on the other hand, explains that they were following the path of a wild animal, which turns out to be the captain sleepwalking. They set out once that was settled. Boji and Cage, along with the Order of the Underworld, continued their journey to Bosse Kingdom after capturing the robbers. In the midst of all of this, they are all caught in a huge sandstorm. When it calms down, they find a small oasis and use it as a resting place. Hyling calls out to her son Daida in a dark area, and she hears his voice calling out to her in the distance. But Hyling can't get to Daida because she can't get past an invisible wall. Dorsha, Hyling's knight, wakes up in the shade of a tree on a grassy field and checks on her. Dorsha regrettably informs Hyling that she cannot return to the Bosse Kingdom's castle, reciting the warning that the Bosse possessing Daida's body gave to him. Despite the fact that the obstinate Hyling insisted that she return to her kingdom regardless of the consequences, Dorsha suggests that they find allies to support their efforts. They meet a woman named Anne, whom Hyling once knew, in a small village that night and request her assistance. She has, however, prior obligations with the village, which is plagued by a bandit problem. As a result, despite Dorsha's warning, Hyling makes the decision to assist Anne and Du in resolving the bandit issue. Daida struggles to pursue his brother Boji when he spots him going on an adventure one day. Boji and Daida have a good time playing together until it starts to rain once he finally catches up to him. After that, Boji asks Daida if he's afraid as they drive home. Boji is traumatized when Daida pushes him, causing him to unintentionally fall off a cliff and injure his left knee. Daida nearly injures himself on his way down to help his brother. After that, he tries to heal his brother's wound, which he does after a few attempts, but he passes out from exhaustion. Daida eventually wakes up in his room with Boji and Hyling by his side. When Daida found out that Boji's magic had healed his wound, he was surprised. We learn the story about Ukin, the once respected Sword King of the Underworld. His father Satan studied the subject, and as a result, Ukin was cursed with immortality. In the past, Satan was thrilled to witness the birth of his third child, whom he later dubbed Ukin, while his other two children, Despa and Desha, watched from a distance. He later gave birth to the child. In the future, Ukin fights his brother Desha, who easily defeats him with his magic. Later, Despa helps Ukin walk by supporting him with his shoulder. Despa consoles Ukin by pointing out that in contrast to his older brothers, Ukin lacks power. Satin kills a few people as time goes on, noting that it's getting close to being there. Despa and Ukin, dressed in robes, would watch as a wagon carrying a cage of criminals drove into the castle. Irate by the destiny of said crooks, Ukin was come by Despa, who needed to attempt to prevent the lawbreakers from being unrightfully executed by their dad. Desha, Ukin's brother, scolded him for being foolish, but he was just as furious about what their father was doing and promised to one day change the country. Eventually, the three brothers, their father, Satun, and his Gigante's army are the targets of a war. Ukin and Fren managed to hold their ground despite the favorable battle tides. In addition to their efforts, a portion of Desha's army takes hostage a child Gigante and uses it to entice a group of Gigantes into a trap that disturbs Desh. Fren comes to King Desha's throne room in the castle and offers to help Desha find the demon that will cure Ukin of his immortality disease. Desha, on the other hand, declines the offer because it is against the law for Fren to leave the underworld. Later, Fren goes to a bar with three soldiers who aren't on duty. He provides them with a round of beverages. The following day, it is discovered that Fren has left the underworld and will be executed upon his return in accordance with underworld law. Later, the three soldiers Fren treated would visit Despa to learn about Ukin's condition and Fren's circumstances. Despa agrees to assist them on the condition that he is not mentioned as assisting them in their endeavor when they ask for his assistance. Fren continues his journey through numerous lands in the present to find a demon. Eventually, Fren comes to Despa and tells him that the only clue he has for where a demon is a woman who was cursed by a demon in Bosse Kingdom. Fren tells Despa about his discovery, and Desha orders Fren to go into exile. Desha claimed he would do anything to save Uka, and Despa would laud Desha's decision. Hokuro, who lost his mother when he was young, made the decision to become a Bosse Kingdom soldier after Prince Boji showed him kindness. Hokuro is being led by his superior when he inquires about Prince Boji's whereabouts. The superior responds that because of his deafness, he has never shown himself to others. Boji would then appear to be enthralled by a praying mantis, and at other times, guarding an entranceway. Hokuro immediately volunteers to accompany Boji on a journey when a volunteer soldier is required. After a mock battle, one of the Big Four Domas, however, rejects him as a worthy candidate. Hokuro uses sign language to persuade Domas and Queen Hilling to accept his plea, and Queen Hilling allows Hokuro to assist Boji on his journey. In his new position as king of the Bosse Kingdom, Boji puts in a lot of effort. Boji accepts Bebin's invitation to go along with his plan to conduct a town inspection one day. They meet a group of 3 children and their grandfather, as well as a boy his age crying over goats and 2 young girls who have lost their beloved bird, Pippi. Cage eats some bread and attracts a small blue bird with a metal collar around its leg, defeating Boji and his friends attempt to call for Pippi by whistling. By throwing a pebble at the bird, Bebin deters it. Bebin orders one of his snakes to locate Cage as Boji's group returns to the castle. Daida and Miranjo have a heart-to-heart, and Daida invites the Big Four to meet in the throne room. On his way, Bebin spots Miranjo running from the library with a book in hand and has one of his snakes investigate her. The Big Four agree to train Daida to have the most optimal ranking they can get. Daida then visits the town to conduct an inspection and witnesses a blind/deaf/mute person fall over. Daida then uses his healing magic to heal the worker's arm, and they find Miranjo teaching the local children how to read, write, and talk in sign language. Daida decides to build a school where the old barracks were, and Miranjo thanks him for his proposal. Before becoming a member of the Big Four and the Bosse Kingdom spy master, Bebin served as a foot soldier in an elite battle unit for his kingdom. He should go to the underworld and get trained by Prince Despa, according to Mitsumata. The captain of the Underworld Knights agrees to bring Bebin to Despa and accept full responsibility for his actions after Bebin is stopped by 2 knights of the Underworld. After completing his training with Despa, Bebin challenges Apeus and defeats him when he returns to the Bosse Kingdom. Bebin entrusts Cage with delivering a letter of recommendation to Boji in the present, the Big Four's banquet. King Daida orders the Big Four to handle the renovation of the castle on site, but Bebin offers to do it alone. Domus declares that he alone can complete the task as a result of this, while Dorsha and Apeas assert that they are capable of doing so independently. The Big Four accept Hokuro's invitation to a night out at a restaurant. An attempt to the story follows a young Cage, who is chased by a trio of kids and returns to his home. He and his mother witness a bullfighting attraction and buy a couple of things from a vendor. While waiting for his mother, Cage makes a sandcastle and chases after a butterfly. Kaio, the greatest knight in the Bow Kingdom, rides his horse down the town streets. Cage helps one of the kids escape as the runaway bull closes in on him, but is saved in the nick of time by Kaio. When asked for his name by Cage, Ryo declines to give it but praises him for his heroic deed. Cage's mother then approaches her son, who claims he'd like to become a knight one day. A brief backstory of how Bosse made a deal with a demon to gain ultimate power is shown, and how he met his future wife Sheena. Sheena stops a thief from stealing a loaf of bread, and the kingdom comes under attack. Sheena talks to the former bread thief outside, who now works as a castle maid. After that, Bosse joins Sheena and reveals that he turned down the ranking rep's offer. He says that he already has everything he wants and will do anything to give Boji everything he'll ever need. Miranjo was a young child from the Huma kingdom when she first started dating Bosse. Miranjo chases a young boy who runs away when she spots him one day while they are in a forest eating from a large dead carcass. Unbeknownst to Miranjo, a wild bear approaches from behind and tries to attack her as she chases after a beautiful flower. The boy watches the action but doesn't say anything to warn Miranjo, but she uses her magic to control it, and when she finds the boy again, she goes after him again. Miranjo decides to return home after losing the boy once more, but she gets lost in the forest. The boy would find Miranjo and hesitate to assist her due to his species' connection to humans and the events that led to his separation from his species. The boy makes the decision to approach Miranjo and eventually leads her out of the forest. Boji leaves the Bosse realm and visits many of his friends. He gives Bebin a present, a doll for Sori and Sandeo, a spearhead for Apeas, a mirror for Mitsumata, a cicada husk for Domas and Hokuro, a blue feather for Hilling, a fang for Dorshi, an acorn for Daida, and a glass orb for Miranjo. Boji eventually reunites with Cage and is greeted by his family and subjects as he departs. Cage and Boji are riding on a wagon down a road with no tentative destination when they pass by a person who looks oddly familiar. Desha follows the ranking official to the legendary Divine Treasure Vault, where he takes an interest in 3 swords with divine words written on them. They then enter a room where a corpse is found wearing a full head mask and 3 spears plunged into its body. Unbeknownst to the two, several shadowy figures watched them as they progressed. Meanwhile, Despa, accompanied by the captain of the Order of the Underworld, walks Oaken's decapitated body to the lake where his head is. Desha makes a deal with the demon girl to break Uken's immortality curse. Uken regains consciousness and tells his brother and the captain that he's back to normal. Despa then chastises Uken for mishandling his sword and techniques, but Uken cries tears of joy over this. A messenger on horseback then arrives, informing the group that King Desha has gone missing since entering the Divine Treasure Vault. Boji and Cage arrive in the Kuya Kingdom, and Cage immediately tells Boji not to show off his gold coins. Boji reviews everything that Domas once said to him and regards Cage's recommendation. After that, they go to a hotel where Boji gives Cage his gold bag. Cage is humbled by Boji's trust. The end. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get new anime recaps.